Hi, I'm Barb Lees.
And I'm Jackie Ng.
And thank you for joining us here at the beautiful Yogashala for a few moments discussing trauma-informed yoga. So, Jackie, we began chatting about this, for a while now, I guess. Mm-hmm. And trauma has become almost a buzzword from today, and certainly in your line of work and in my line of work, we've seen the intersecting of these points on many, many occasions. And so I guess the first question I might ask you that many people probably are asking for themselves, what is trauma and what denotes the level of stress when we get to call it trauma?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I remember when I was in medical school and we would, talk about trauma, the questions would be like, oh, have you ever broken a bone, or have you ever been in a car accident? But I would say that in the past decade, the idea and the understanding of what trauma is has dramatically shifted. Trauma is not an event. In fact, we define trauma as the response of the body, the nervous system, and the whole being when we experience something that is overwhelming, that gives us a sense of not having choice or feeling helpless. And so what I think is fundamentally important to understand is that trauma is not about the event itself. Mm-hmm. It's about the intersection between this human being and something that's happening in their internal experience. And so taking that definition, we can recognize that something like a car accident can affect any person in any number of ways because we're so unique, and it really depends on how we are in the state of our being at the time that interfaces with our internal experience. So when we take this broader definition of trauma, which is a state of being that arises in the nervous system when we become overwhelmed, we can understand actually that the statistic that gets said that over 90% of people will experience a traumatic event in their life begins to make a little bit more sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So our response to the event is really the way that we can start to understand trauma, and that there are different levels of trauma.
Yes. I think the other thing that's important is to recognize that the response is not something that we choose.
Absolutely.
Right? It's something that happens because of how we're built, because of the neuroscience of this body, because of how our nervous system functions. And so that was really important for me to understand that it doesn't actually have to do with you, the person.
And sometimes we're not even aware of what our response is, or that we have responded at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we do respond.
We do respond.
And whether we are cognitively aware of that response, it doesn't matter, because there is a reaction, and that reaction, of course, is in the body.
Lives in the body. So that's one of the reasons I think that the intersection between trauma and yoga therapy has become so closely intertwined, because when we think about the technology of yoga, not only asana, but also breathwork, meditation, all the 8 limbs of yoga, this really is a system that is based in the body and accessing the healing potential and the wisdom that exists in the body. And so you can understand that our nervous system is actually really intelligent, and it is seeking to find balance and regulation all on its own. And yoga is just one of the technologies in which we can access that wisdom and learn to work with this body that we are to resolve some of the effects of traumatic stress.
And the word that's coming to mind, well, there are a couple. Interoception is one, so another buzzword, but it gives us yoga gives us the tools to begin to move inwardly with our awareness. So to move beyond just our thinking mind, which is brilliant, but to move into understanding and recognizing how our body is responding to these life events that come at us, which of course brings up another buzzword.
Embodiment.
Embodiment, exactly. And I find the two are sometimes intertwined and bled together, but I think there's quite a distinct difference. I think, embodiment is our body's way of receiving information or receiving the response from the events that happen in our life. Our brains respond as well. They respond in a cognitive way. Our bodies respond in a physical way. So perhaps a little example makes it always a little clearer. So for some of us, there may be something that happens in our life that we're not even aware of the trigger, but we suddenly notice, oh, I've got that indigestion again, or I've got that sort of tightness in my belly, or, oh yeah, I've got that real tight feeling in my neck again, or maybe the sides of my throat. Oh, I must have maybe pulled a muscle or something, but it feels like someone's kind of squeezing me around the sides of the neck a little bit. Those are all embodiment responses for the most part. And left unattended to, they will develop into either, GI issues or digestive issues in some way, and long-term because of course, the way the body works. So to develop an interoceptive ability through a yoga practice, this is why yoga is so brilliant, and I think it's why it's become our go-to, certainly during these last few years, but really over the last 2 decades, we've seen this incredible rise in popularity of yoga. And again, not always knowing why, but it allows us to learn how to move into feeling. Truly, that's what it is. It allows us to learn to become aware of what is happening in our body so that we can begin to then listen to what our body has embodied and what it is saying.
I love that. I think, for much of my career, I had one foot in the medical world and then one foot in this world of, yoga and meditation and some of the more, we can say, esoteric sort of contemplative things. And it was really when I started to study trauma and trauma therapy that finally the two worlds fused together, actually, in the sense that whether the yogis knew it or not, what they were doing through the technology of yoga was monitoring and modifying the state of their nervous system. And so it's been a really interesting journey for me to begin to understand why it is that yoga works.
Yeah.
And most importantly, in fact, why some kinds of yoga seem to work for one person and other kinds of yoga seem to not. That you can, as an instructor, for example, teach a class and some people will leave feeling quite relaxed and other people might leave actually feeling a little bit more activated or overwhelmed. And the answer to why that is really lies in understanding what state your body and your nervous system is in, and then choosing the appropriate tool to be able to balance and regulate and support.
Yes, and that demands a fair bit more from an instructing point of view. It demands that you have a broader scope of knowledge of the terminology. And, yoga, in some ways, through different decades, was very militaristically driven, if I can use that term, that it was very specific. And particularly in North America, we have developed, certain approaches to things. And I think with the neuroscience coming in, with psychology coming in to find, as you said, Jackie, these cross points with yoga, which to me, those are always very welcome points in my life. When I see points of knowledge intersecting, I know I'm on the right path and that it reaffirms the work that I do. When we are finding those points, we then have to be able to incorporate those into the language of instruction. And that sometimes will take us out of perhaps the lineage that we've studied under or the teacher that we've worked with. And quite the opposite. The baseline for yoga should always have these intersecting points, whether it's yin, whether it's yang, whether it's restorative, whether it's a power class, whether it's, whatever style of class it is, the bottom line is that it is yoga. It offers the ability to develop greater interoception, the ability to move into feeling what is going on in your body that day, and then the understanding of reading embodiment. So throughout this course, we start with the 4-hour workshop where we'll, just welcome everyone to just learn a little bit more about themselves, to read our bodies, and to then have a greater ability to tone our nervous system. Because there are days when we need stress, right? Yes. And I think that's the other thing, that stress is not, we've demonized stress. And what we, I think, also have to recognize is that it's how long we're in that stress response that we want to be aware of as well. Mm-hmm. And has it become a way that we have adapted to living because of the traumas that we have gone through in our life? And the only way we can navigate that is to feel what the body is holding on to, what it is doing, and how to, and there are sometimes we need to stay there for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in yoga particularly, there's a lot of misinformation about how the nervous system functions and what's a good way of working with the nervous system, that for ease of understanding sometimes has become overly simplified. And so one of the things that we want to do in this workshop is to demystify some of those myths, and really to give you just enough understanding that you can begin to know your own embodiment, to understand your state of being and how the different modalities of yoga can support you, so that you can do that for your students, so that you can do that for your loved ones, because it's really in our capacity to understand this state and technology that we become able to really support others in a way that's meaningful, and to support ourselves, which is so important. So
I think as we recognize we're in constant fluctuation, and to be able to discern that there are some days, oh boy, I'm in a very reactive sort of mood today, or something's triggering me. That's a gift. That's a gift to have that. And then to choose the tools that will help yourself with that. I think that is what we can do as both a yoga practitioner and as a yoga instructor, and a clinician in different areas, where we can use the tools of yoga to offer people agency over their practice, in their practice, and in their lives.